Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for visiting my website. My name's David, and I want to share with you how I learned English as my first language, even though I'm not a native English speaker. I'm actually Indian, and my mother tongue is Tamil. It's a language that's used in the southeast part of India, and that's where my family's from. But I was not raised in India. I was actually born and raised in Brunei. Brunei is a tiny little country in Southeast Asia. It's near Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And the national language there is Malay, so that's actually the third language that I speak. So far we've talked about English, Tamil, and Malay. And the fourth language that I speak is Japanese. Now, I learned all four of these languages in exactly the same way, and that is not by studying them. Instead, I learned them the exact same way that you learned your native language. You see, what we're taught in school and what we're conditioned to believe is that languages are knowledge-based skills, or they're heavily knowledge-based. And that's why the focus is often on studying grammar rules and memorizing vocabulary lists. But that's actually not how any of us learn our first language. And we're all fluent in our first language. So my message is this: if we have already achieved fluency in one language, our mother tongues, then we have a method already to learn a language effectively, and it's gotten us results. So when we learn a new language like English, why don't we just use the exact same method that has already gotten us success and fluency? Think about it. When you were a child, how did you learn your native language? Did your parents sit you down in a classroom and give you workbooks and textbooks and explain grammar rules on a whiteboard? No, of course not. That's not how you learned your first language. Now, of course, when you got a little bit older, when you started going to school, you would have taken your native language as a subject and you would have studied grammar rules then. But you were already speaking the language fluently, you were already thinking in the language before you started going to school. So here's what actually helps with internalizing languages and being able to think in the language. There are three things. Your learning experience needs to be relevant, real, and contextual. RRC. That's what you need to remember. RRC. First, I said it needs to be relevant. I get a lot of questions from my students asking, David, which books should I learn from? Which movies should I watch? Which vocabulary lists should I memorize? And I always say it depends. For example, if you're going to use English at work as an engineer, you need to be learning and exposing yourself to more of the language that can be used in that environment. But let's say you're a nurse or you're somebody who works in the healthcare industry. You don't really need to know engineering terms like drag coefficient, right? Those are not relevant to you. So the first thing is that the language we learn, the language we practice and expose ourselves to, it needs to be relevant to what we are going to use it for. Second, your learning experience needs to be real in your life. And I mean not just consuming media that exposes you to the language, but you need to actually be using it in your day-to-day life, talking about your real experiences. You need to be forming memories associated with the language that you're both learning and using on a daily basis. And thirdly, it needs to be contextual. When we learn new words, it shouldn't just be a set of grammar rules or a set of words or a set of phrases without any real context. We need to actually know when to use them, how to use them. And there are all of these subtle, nuanced differences between words in English. There are words that are very similar in meaning, but in one situation we'd use one word, and in another situation we'd use the other one, and the only difference there is really just context. In fact, if you even ask a native speaker to explain the difference between these two, they sometimes won't be able to. They just instinctively know which one to use appropriately because they have understood and learnt this language in context. Now, you're probably thinking, oh, well, that means I need to live in an English-speaking country or I need to have native speakers to practice with. Well, no, that's not what I mean, because I didn't have either of those two things, and that didn't stop me from learning English as my first language. It doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter where you're from, especially now using the internet, there are so many resources and tools that we can use to create an RRC learning experience for ourselves. But if you're saying to me right now, David, I get you, I want to learn English, I'm committed to this, this is really important to me, but I don't have the money or the time or the resources to go and live in an English-speaking country or to take lessons regularly with a professional teacher, then I have something for you. I've created a 12-day course, and basically it's my answer to the question, how do I become fluent without spending lots of money? How can I create opportunities to learn English that are RRC by myself, either for free or for just very, very little money? So in this course, I want to show you all of the different tools and resources that you can use to learn English by yourself, or even to learn English with somebody else for a very small investment. And I also want to share with you about language learning psychology. I want you to understand how our brains process language learning so that you actually understand why these different resources work, why these study strategies and learning methods work. I'm going to be sharing with you how I learned all 4 languages that I know. And in fact, your English learning journey is probably more similar to my Japanese learning journey. I started learning Japanese in my adulthood. I was 25 years old when I started from zero. And now 7 years later, even though I've never taken a Japanese lesson, I've never touched a Japanese textbook, I'm now working at a Japanese company where I do everything in Japanese, presentations, emails, reports, so on. I don't speak perfect Japanese. It's still a work in progress. I've got a long way to go, and I'm learning every single day and I'm improving every single day. But the point is that my Japanese is good enough that I'm able to use it in a professional context. And I managed to do all of this without studying grammar rules and without memorizing vocabulary lists. So it really is possible. I want to share with you how we can learn languages naturally, the way that our brains are designed to work and process languages.